The next panel is a very unique one. It's about automation and human spaceflight. And as we look at using commercial crew and the design of these spacecraft, there's a real question relative to how much automation there should be in the interaction of the crew. Because certainly looking at the spacecraft that we have flown previously, the crew always had a role to play in flying the vehicle, and certainly that showed that it's been very beneficial. So it's something that we need to take a hard look at. And also, if you look at certainly the aviation industry, automation has played a part, not too good a part in, say, the 737 MAX. So it's a very timely subject. And Steve Robinson from the University of California, Davis, and an astronaut in his own right, who I think has probably got a good sense of what the pilot's role is and what the interaction ought to be, is our moderator. So let me turn it over to him.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Happy. We'll try this mic. Transfer over to this one. It's an honor to be here, and to hear the last panel was just incredible, just amazing. Having grown up, just like all of us, with the space program, regardless of our age, we grew up with the space program. It motivated us in our careers and our lives and our hearts and our minds. And so it's very exciting to be back here. And back here where I consider home, back in Houston. I was at JSC for 17 years. Part of my career with NASA was 37 years. I started in the end of 1974 as a student, working to help design the shuttle heat shield. My job had nothing to do with the design. I helped load the wind tunnel models into the hypersonic wind tunnel, and painted the wind tunnel once, actually. And that led to a fascinating career that is still going on. Now my profession is educator, and I work very closely with NASA and a number of incredibly smart and talented students, both undergraduates and graduate students, with several of the NASA centers, many of whom are working on the topic of today's panel here, human spaceflight and automation. So let me introduce our panel here. It's an incredibly experienced group of folks. I'll just say the names very quickly. Dr. Tamara Elina from RSC Energia, Dr. Lee Morin, current astronaut from here at JSC, Bill Shepard, former astronaut, and Dr. Don Pettit, current astronaut at JSC. I'd like to have everybody introduce themselves, beginning with Bill Shepard.
I'm going to do an introduction for Tamara because I'm not sure she's known for many, and then I'm going to toss the ball to her. Tamara was an engineering graduate of MIFI, Moscow Institute for Fizические Исследования? Instrumentation. Anyway, it's an engineering institute in Moscow. Engineer Physics Institute in Moscow. She joined RSC Energia shortly after that, and spent 37 years as a computer engineer. And she played a pivotal role in designing and supervising all the computers on the Russian segment, laying out all the controls and displays, training the first expedition and several others beyond that. So if you want an expert on Russian International Space Station computer systems, I give you Tamara.
I start. Я по-русски.
I will speak Russian. I am working at Energia, started in 1971. That was my work on interface of machine and human. At that time, as you understand, the instrumentation that we had was quite primitive. Not the same level, not the same as now. And the interface was quite simple. That was done via a manual control unit for the crew, and we could only type in letters or numbers. There was no other service. This is what we had at that time. In 1980s already, we started using the display that is called symbol, and we were able to have a very good interface for the crew. We had not only numeric, alphanumeric control, but also graphic interface. We had also a video signal. The interface was really nice. And all the crews that were using Soyuz T vehicle were thanking us for the good design. Bill can confirm. You have the list of gratitude letters for our. Please confirm that you do appreciate what we have done. And when in 1990s we continued working on ISS, I was again involved in design as an experienced team. The laptops allowed us to do much more. I will be talking not only about positive sides, but I will also tell you some things that should have been done differently. It is sad that Russian side was designing their computer systems separately from the US systems. We were working not together at that time, and I'm blaming our management, common management. I believe that was a mistake. At that time, they decided it was not necessary to work together. And the result was not as good. It was a bad result because the U.S. specialist, John Markham, was the lead. He had alphanumeric design, and we had the graphic design. But because of Shepard and Sergei Krigalov, when they realized what we have done, they got horrified. They told us, what have you done? How are we going to work together? Because on one screen, we see this information in alphanumeric form, in the other in graphic design. It should be brought together. And then they told us we have to choose which one is better. Actually, the graphic was more usable. So we designed integrated digital graphics standard where the US and European and the Russian crew were working together. That was already good. However, it came up a bit late because a lot has been done already. For Russians, it's okay. They would do everything. It doesn't matter how much time they have. However, with the US design, they have done already too much already because we were thinking in a different way, and that would be taking more time. When we checked it out, our future cosmonauts and astronauts advised us. We decided to use certain ways with designing this express panel. Again, we did not have a really good base. Besides the specialists who developed, we did not quite understand how a human is operating. We are working at a human design interface aspect. We are talking at a medical forum right now, and this is where it should have been addressed initially. When we realized that our approach is wrong, that we are not taking into consideration the peculiarities of working of a human, So actually, we have discussed we had heated discussions between U.S. and Russian specialists. Everybody decided that they were right. We didn't have we didn't have a moderator. We always were bringing the crew who would tell us what they like better. When I decided that the crew, that we didn't have the right approach, we were agreeing upon a certain icon, and we agreed upon the specialist, and astronaut Azeev was horrified by what we have designed, and we designed a certain icon. However, for this icon means a totally different thing, and it doesn't mean something good at all. That is why I decided that we have to bring different specialists together. We have to bring people who understand the reaction of a human being to some elements that we didn't even think about. In medicine, I don't understand anything at all. I'm afraid of medical people, in fact. However, we needed people who would know psychological, physical aspects of human reaction. The emotions that we were getting from the astronauts would not be expected by us. So one of the Asian specialists saw that what we have done, he did not like it. We thought we had a good interface, however, it was not acceptable from a cosmonaut perspective. We didn't know how a human being would react to some, things that what kind of associations a person may have by seeing an icon that we have developed, and we were relying on the reaction of the crew. So we decided that the interface that we have designed was a robot/computer, because a robot would not have emotions. Humans have emotions, and we have to take that into consideration. We were supposed to bring in people who understand psychology or physiology of a human being before we design something that will be used by a human being. If such difficulties occur, we were supposed to have a different approach. We needed to take into account reaction of a prospective crew member. What else I can say? The U.S. side has actually come up with the graphic interface, right? I didn't know. That's not. Did the U.S. side started using graphic interface?
Yes and no. Graphics, as long as it's very simple.
Не совсем.
Что он сказал?
Если просто и недорого.
Да.
You're not working well then, my dear friends. Okay. What I can say, the reaction to what we have done, to graphic or some other interfaces we have developed, maybe in flight there would be a situation that, say, if a crew member is having a medical issue, anything can happen. Even everybody who can be well trained and know everything, there will be stress situation when somebody will misunderstand what the display is trying to tell him, and then a human error is possible. We need to bring in a specialist who would foresee these kind of situations. Somebody who will tell us, what if in a stress situation this display is shown to a person, what kind of reaction we may expect. But what we were doing only an observation, but we don't want to scare a person, we don't want to mislead a crew member. So the questions that we had with the displays, we should be having a more palatable approach. We need to do something that will help. Actually, the crew member will have to understand that the person is reacting nominally and predictable. And what if in space is going to happen? Maybe this person will react to the display incorrectly, or maybe this is not the right person who is in space who is using this display. We don't know. Also, what if a task is given to one crew member, but then a different crew member is using this particular display, and we may not know about it? We need to be able to predict this kind of things. What I would like to do, we need to make sure that we have the right people to be able to log into the laptop. We don't know which crew member, for example, is using the laptop, because the login is the same for all cosmonauts, and that will have to be broken up, because we need to know who exactly is using a particular display. Also, whoever is using the display, we need to know in what kind of condition this person is. So from the medical support, we need to have the information of the condition of a particular crew member at a particular time when he is using this particular display. And maybe if this person is not in the right condition to use this particular display, that needs to be changed. What else can I say?
I thought you didn't like doctors.
Нет, я их не люблю.
I don't like doctors, but we need them. We need doctors. I don't like doctors' visits. I don't want to know anything bad, but we need their help here. What I'm talking about. What else I can say? I described a few problems. However, it is really great when during development the crew is involved as well, because that helps us to understand what else we need to enhance the operation. When we didn't work with the American side initially, it was bad. I think our designers just, they decided that we can develop our thing and the U.S. side can develop their own side. No, we should have been doing that together from the very beginning. We would have done it better. The interface would be better. I believe that what we have done is not enough. We need to combine with other specialists, with people who have knowledge in different fields, and improve the interface. However, it's already quite usable. The crews now are using that with no problems. Maybe it's enough for me, huh? What do you think?
Спасибо, Dr. Yelena. I think what I'd like to do is continue. Everything I was going to say was just said, but I will say it not as well and in a different language, but I won't say it yet until we finish our introduction. So if you would just introduce yourself, Dr. Morin.
Yes, I'm Lee Morin. I'm currently a management astronaut. I've been working on the Orion cockpit for the last 15 years. Hopefully we'll be flying in the very near future. I joined the astronaut office in '96, was in the Navy as a flight surgeon, and was in the Sardine class with Don Pettit was one of my classmates, and flew on 2002. That was up to Expedition 4 on Space Station. And I actually had an opportunity with Piers Sellers, another classmate, our late Piers Sellers, to work in Tamara's laboratory at Energia for several weeks. And she was so patient with these American rookies. But both of us learned a lot from her colleagues and from her. So that was a pleasure. Thank you again for that opportunity.
Thank you, Lee. Captain Shepard.
Bill Shepard, I flew on Expedition 1, but prior to that I spent the better part of 5 years going to meetings with George and many others in the room. Part of the interesting work on that was trying to get a handle on integrating the partner nations, and particularly the Russian and the U.S. segments. The computer environment, or environments, should I say, was a big part of that. Just on the U.S. side, we had two separate kinds of computer systems, and between the two laptops that we had, I think the number of individual pages that you had on displays was something over 2,500. And they were all developed by different people. They were all being constructed by folks with good intent, but they were not integrated. And so looking at the Russian segment, we started out early on to try and drive the two segments to the same standard, and that's a lot of what Tamara mentioned. We made, I thought, good progress in that, but I think there is much left to be done, and maybe we can talk about that later.
Thank you, Bill. Dr. Pettit.
I'm Don Pettit. I'm in the astronaut office. I'm still active in the hunt. I haven't started to, teach a course on how to chip an arrow point yet. But what I'd like to say about future spacecraft, and these are spacecraft where we're going to go away from Earth for long periods of time. We need to make these saved so that they're maintainable by the crew, so that we can figure out how to fix them when they break down, because they will break down. And we are going to have to be able to fix them if you want to come home. And I think we're all going to want to be able to come home, at least sometime. And there's a paper by a fellow by the name of Joe Fragola that did a probabilistic risk assessment based off of NASA's design reference mission from 2010. And if we use the current model for maintenance, which is you take a box the size of a refrigerator, and when it breaks, you remove that box and plug in the new box that's the size of a refrigerator. If that is your maintenance model, which Space Station was designed around, to do the design reference Mars mission, if it takes a mass in low Earth orbit to do that mission, you have to have an equal mass adjusted spare parts to do the mission if you want 3 chances out of 4 to be successful. So that was the probabilistic risk assessment based on the current maintenance model. So for the future design of spacecraft, we need to be able to have the skill set and the parts and the tools on board to really take things apart down to the component level. If a diode blows on a circuit board, you can't replace something the size of a refrigerator. You got to be able to poke around on the circuit, find the blown diode, which is about the size of a pea, and then open up your drawer full of spare diodes and then solder in the new diode, and then you keep your mission going. And that, I think, is going to be a challenge for designing a spacecraft in the future.
Thank you, Don. And that opens up kind of the problem statement of this whole forward-looking issue that designing new spacecraft is challenging us with. NASA's got a lot of experience with fully robotic missions, meaning mostly remote control and automated with a little bit of autonomy starting to grow into it, and fully human-tended with onboard and from the ground. The ISS is, very, very fragile device that requires an awful lot of human ingenuity, intellect, and hands-on care and experience. So as we look forward to thinking about an intermittently crewed operations model, a deep space mission that has crew on board for some of the time and not crew on board for the other times. So what is the best mix of designing the responsibilities for decision making, for operational mission objectives, and especially for repair, detection of when repair is needed and executing it when it is needed? What is the best mix between the automation on board a modern spacecraft and having crews on board? In fact, what should the crew's job be when they're on board a vehicle that is completely capable of autonomous control? We've done a little bit of this kind of thinking way back in Skylab, but Skylab was only uncrewed for a few weeks at a time, 4 to 6 weeks at a time. And when I was thinking about Skylab, I was thinking about how many people here, since we have such history of medical study of space travelers here, how many people here were involved in the Skylab Medical Experiment Altitude Test, the SMEAT, in 1972? 1972, 56 days. The crew was Bob Crippen, Carol Bobko, Bill Thornton. And the interesting thing was it was a 70% O2 and about 4.8 PSI done here at JSC just before Skylab went, which was a great way to shake out some of the systems in Skylab. Led to some redesign, I think, of the urine processing and collection system, among other things. It just goes to show that ground testing is absolutely essential, and crew on board is essential, as Don says, for dealing with the unforeseen problems that you're going to have. But new technologies are going to help us in doing these things, such as dense sensor systems, which sound great, except they lead to extremely large data sets. Now we have to have some sort of way of downsizing, filtering, and making those data sets become useful information with decision-making knowledge embedded in them. System health diagnostics, prognosticating what's going to happen next. How long can you wait to effect a repair? Can you download a system to delay the repair? And should you repair the system, swap out a box, or solder in a new diode? Machine learning, computer vision, whatever your definition of artificial intelligence is. Intelligent systems to sort the data, help the crew make decisions, or ground crew make decisions, or make decisions autonomously on board. The crew interfaces that I think Lee's going to talk about a little bit, multisensory, not just visual. And that can include virtual reality, augmented reality, multisensory integration systems that feed back to the crew, and then the just-in-time crew training. If you're on a mission and a critical system breaks down, you have 2 days to fix it or all is lost, and you have never touched or seen that system before, you should have the skills on board to be able to integrate them into the task execution that allows you to do the repair on board. So this requires an awful lot of flexibility and thinking going into the future. So leaving that problem statement kind of open, and on top of the wisdom that we've already heard from the panel, I would like to turn it over to Lee, and I think you've got a few slides for us, right?
Yes. Thank you, Steve. I'd like to just give an overview of where I think we are with spacecraft cockpits. Going into Orion, the concept was we were going to, the shuttle had 2,000 controls, physical controls the crew could interact with. A lot of those were sheets of circuit breakers, but nevertheless it was 2,000. It was about 1,249, depending on what shuttle you were on, that the flight crew could touch during ascent or view during ascent or entry. The Orion was eliminate the 100 panels and put it on maybe 7 panels. Instead of the 2,000 controls, it's more like about 100 controls, little LED lights or knobs, buttons, switches. And on the shuttle there also were 250 pounds of books called FDF. Now some of that was souvenirs, but nevertheless it still was hundreds of pounds of books, multiple copies of books for different crew members. And on Orion the path was you get 1 pound of books, they reboot the computer book. Everything else has to be on the computer. And in terms of the amount of glass that you have to put things on, the shuttle, the crew had 10 MEDS displays. Orion basically has the equivalent of about 6 in terms of screen area. So you have all the switches go on the glass, all the automation goes on the glass, all the books go on the glass, and you have half as much glass. Make it work. And so that was the sort of the engineering challenge that we tackled 15 years ago. And in fact, we had persuaded, the crew office had persuaded the Orion program that we actually needed 4 screens or 8 pieces of glass, and we had that for a while. And then with weight reductions, weight reductions, that got dropped down to 3. I still have a cockpit, Orion cockpit, with 4 screens in it in our laboratory as a political statement, but 3 is what we have to work with these days. And so the way that we have solved this problem is to have the procedures available in the avionics and have them very tightly integrated with the screen. Working from one computer screen to another computer screen through the human is very work intensive, and all of us have tried to do a tutorial, for example, on a Microsoft Word or something, where you look at the tutorial and then try to find the icon on the display. It has a very high workload going back and forth. You don't have enough screens to do it, and that's a problem. So we took the approach that we were going to integrate the electronic procedures as much as possible. The second thing is looking back at the task, the shuttle crew spent a lot of time, first of all, was recognizing the problem. And then from the problem, getting on the right page in the book. And lots of opportunities for error and getting everyone on the right page in the book. And then from the right page in the book, bringing up the right tools in the cockpit, whether they were switches or computer screens, and making the right inputs to solve the problem. It took a tremendous amount of training. The first time you were thrown into this cockpit, it was overwhelming and bewildering. It was months and months before you even started to feel comfortable with how to operate the shuttle as a crew member. Big training overhead. So what I'd like to do is to just talk about this. So the Orion has 3 screens. And this is one of the screens. And the top of the screen and the bottom of the screen are kind of separate. You have edge keys along the top and along the bottom that aren't shown here that allow you to navigate to a tree of about 60 display formats, which are the screens that you see 2 of on here. And in the middle, there is a center status bar that has information not related to a specific display. It gives you the current time, and it also shows you the latest caution message. And so here we have a primary flight display on the top and a system summary on the bottom. And I will say that these are notional displays that have been cleared for public release. So these are Orion-like, but not the actual Orion displays. So this is what the crew might be looking at. We go to the next slide. And if you look closely, you'll see in the center status bar, right in the middle under pre-launch, there's a caution message there. That would be associated with the tone to make sure the crew brings their attention to this screen. And then the next thing they would do is bring up the caution and warning page, and the caution message is there shown on that. And that is linked to an electronic procedure system, which we call EPROC. You can see the button, so if the crew's ready to work that procedure, they would just push the EPROC. And the EPROC then shows up. And this now is the procedure that they want to work. The crew looks at this and sees that, yeah, that really is what we want to do. And then they start interacting with this and working through the procedure. And you can see the procedure statements have the familiar format of a sequence of lines. And then the crew starts working through this. Now, as they work through it, the line brings up on the other half of the screen the displays that are needed to support that procedure. And so you have the ability for the EPROC to go rapidly from screen to screen to fetch the information that's needed. This saves the crew a tremendous amount of workload by not having to find the right screen and to not having to find the right object on the screen. On the shuttle, there were some real gotchas. There were fuel cell switches that were labeled 1, 3, 2. If you shut off number 2 thinking you were shutting off number 3 by mistake, that could cause a loss of mission or loss of crew, for example. And there were gotchas like that. Those kinds of mistakes are hard to do here because the procedures are going to find the right object. Then the crew can be presented with yes/no questions that you see on the bottom. And the key is to present the information in the procedure to the crew in their mental model of the vehicle. The electronic procedures never send commands right to the vehicle. They always send commands and cue the command for the crew to send automatically, to send when they want to. The crew has to hit that exec button to execute that step, every step of the way with EPROC. And the commands are always sent from the schematic pages that are the crew's mental model that they're used to thinking about the vehicle. In this case, the crew answers yes or no appropriately and then moves on. When it's time to command, you can see there's a little pop-up at the top that comes up. The correct command, which is to turn off that switch, is highlighted. And then when the crew pushes the enter, they've transmitted that commanded the vehicle to make that change. After they've worked this procedure, another shortcut, takes them back. You no longer need that EPROC, you no longer need the caution and warning page, and you want to go back to the primary flight display and the system summary, for example. So it takes you back to your baseline situation. And that basically is the gist of making this work. Now, the next question is, what about all this automation? Having a vehicle that's completely automatic, that's like riding an elevator. Pretty simple user interface, you just push it and it takes you to the floor. That's great as long as everything works. Having anything that's totally manual takes some training, but it's easier to build the interfaces. There's only, basically not that many ways to do it. Everything has a switch. The in-between, where you want the vehicle to have a lot of automation but still have the crew keep an eye on it, that's the challenge. And there is a lot of automation that's going to be in Orion, and the key is to keep the crew in the loop of what the automation is doing. And if the automation goes awry or they don't necessarily want to execute that automation, to give them parallel EPROCs for each automated procedure. And now you can get into a situation where by going through an EPROC line by line, you have the ability to skip steps or substitute steps. It's almost, for programmers, it would be like working through a debugger, where you can go through the procedure line by line, and then you get to the steps you don't want to do, you could do other things. So the EPROC gives you a backup capability to the automation, in some sense gives you a software troubleshooting or software workaround capability. Now, and let me just say one other word on what the real challenges are here to these user interfaces. And Tamara asked me the question, are we going to have graphical interfaces? And the answer is yes, but. And the but is that the technology that's going to be available on spacecraft is going to be much, much less capable in terms of computing power and graphics power than the iPhones that we all have in our pocketbooks or wearing on our belts. It's already orders of magnitude less than that. And the reason is because of the radiation susceptibility. You get out into deep space, the things that make our new cell phones so compact and powerful also make them very susceptible to radiation. And there's not, at least at this time, there's not a big market to make those radiation hard. And so it involves using special techniques, including a lot of redundancy. In one level, Orion has 9 layers of computational redundancy, just because you really want to make sure you don't lose your state vector that you're propagating if your computers fail, and they're going to fail, and so you need to design for that. When it came to doing graphics, when I started off with this program, we got the word from headquarters, America's next spaceship is going to have gaming quality graphics in the cockpit for the crew. And so so I said, okay, go make it happen. Well, you start looking into it, and what you really need to do is to make a rad hard graphics card. And you need to go to a company like, I won't mention company names, but a graphic card company, and get intellectual property for their crown jewels, which are those graphics cards. The price tag on that is probably about $50 million. Then you got to find a foundry, and then you got to make that as an FPGA rad hardened chip. So we're talking $50 to $100 million. I went to the Orion program manager and said, carve out $100 million for me, because we're going to have gaming quality graphics.
Or we can just send Don up to orbit and he can make the card out of food wrappers.
That's right. That's right. So anyway, the bottom line is that, this is the challenge. It's stuff that your 13-year-old says, why can't my cell phone is cooler than that? And the answer is the radiation tolerance and susceptibility is really a bottleneck for doing the stuff that we take for granted on our phones and realizing it on a spacecraft cockpit that has to be reliable and has to work in a high radiation environment. And as we get more and more autonomous, we're going to need to do more and more on board. I don't know how to leave it with that.
Lee, I'd like to add that we've all seen the blue screen of death on our laptops. And how'd you like to be in a dynamic phase of flight and see that on the computer that's controlling your spacecraft? It's a completely different machine.
Shuttle Rendezvous.
Yeah,
Blue screen of death. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lee, thanks very much. Lee has been a true leader in the entire space world in thinking about these things at a much deeper level than most of us operators. I know not too long after I showed up, Lee was in the class after I was, and not too long after we were all there, Lee came out with a system with a bunch of computer-based training that he had written himself to help all of us people trying to learn this complicated space shuttle, system by system, including malfunctions and things that he had written on his own in what spare time. And since then, he's been going on forward. And so the success of Orion and the interface of the crew in a successful flight is going to be in very large part due to Lee Morin and his team. So thanks very much. Bill?
Steve, just a comment on that. Working with the Sergei and Yuri, our crew on Expedition 1 and Tamara, I quickly got the reality of how hard it might be for someone who grows up not speaking English as their first language to come over to the States and plow through our 250 pounds of flight data file and figure out what's going on. And it's probably the same for people from other partner nations on space station. So we pushed a graphic layout for all manner of things, including the computer displays, really hard. And I still think that ought to be a primary driver if we're going to have extended missions in space with multinational crews. We've got to think about that. And I realize that we have technical issues with the graphic cards, but I do think a totally English text-based interface is not the way to go.
You know, when we were first learning the shuttle or the space station interfaces and the graphical user interfaces that were being designed and trained to us before you flew on Expedition 1. I remember on Expedition 4 being in Star City and Tamara and her team coming over and visiting us. And we'd already had the experience of saying, who made these decisions on the US side? These don't make sense. Who made these? And the answer was, we're not sure. It was a contractor to the contractor. We're not sure who made those. So we don't know, we're not sure who to talk to. We went to Russia and we said, who designed these? Tamara says, we did. Do you have any suggestions for us? It was such a breath of fresh air. It was a wonderful thing. So we have a few more minutes, maybe about 5 more minutes, you guys. Bill, if you would like to say a few things, and then we'll go to Don.
Yeah, I, in my life past NASA, do a lot of work about where automation is going, particularly in aerospace and defense. And one of the big questions as we use large data sets, we have machine learning and AI, many of these processes are not deterministic, which means that if you go back and try and look at how did this machine get to that decision, it can't be retraced in any reasonable amount of time and resource to figure out exactly why the machine thinks that. And this really raises the question when we get to very high levels of automation, how do we trust these highly intelligent systems? How does the crew have enough awareness of what the state of the vehicle is, and is the machine doing the right thing, and how does it know how to do the right thing? These are huge questions, and they're only going to get bigger. I just look at even the shuttle with the many millions of lines of code. I didn't think there was a human in NASA who understood everything that was in the flight software. And I'm sure now there are very few people that could say the same about any spacecraft we fly. So we're faced with a small number of crew who are asking to understand increasingly complex machinery with tens, maybe hundreds of millions of lines of code and make sense of it. How do we do that?
Excellent question. Don, do you have follow-ups to your original remarks?
I was just going to answer Bill's question. I don't know.
And if Don doesn't know, we got big problems.
Well, it actually is just about time to wrap up already. I feel like we've just gotten started. Looking towards the future based on this this rich heritage that is represented so well here today. So I'm going to leave us all with a few questions, something to think about that really spring from the discussions we've had here and things that just a small subset of questions that we have to address in thinking about these future spacecraft, especially ones that are going to have crew there only part of the time. So I want to know, how does flying on such a software-driven, semi-autonomous spacecraft affect the crew selection? and crew training, and ongoing crew training, including on board. What are the important lessons from our own history to bring forward to these new kinds of missions? Are we cognizant of the lessons that we've learned the hard way? Are the new people coming in, the people that we're training in the universities and coming into NASA and the contractors and the commercial spacecraft companies, are they aware of the lessons that we learned and the hard way to get us to where we are? I ask, what level of robotic repair are we capable of right now? And I mean, that could be fully autonomous robotic repair, human-guided from on board or from the ground. And especially I ask, and this is really another way of asking what Bill asked, does a highly autonomous spacecraft that has a crew on board have a chance of increasing the risk to the crew? Yes, it does. So what do we do about that? So we'll leave you with those questions to think about. I will thank our panel very much for their insights and all of you for paying attention during your lunch.